meeting is being recorded.
Welcome everyone to the SIG Network Policy PI meeting. This is a CNCF sponsored meeting, so let's follow the code of conduct and be nice to each other. All right, our agenda today is not that big, and Hunter is first today.
Hey Nadia. Just had two talking points for policy assistant today. Wanted to get the group's feedback on how we should do a release, because it's gonna be probably unrelated to the API release. And then the second point is more about process, I guess. Perhaps it makes sense to start with the second point.
Sure, if you'd like.
Okay. So just some context on this project. When I joined the group a bit over a year ago, Andrew was a big proponent of like user tooling to help like members understand the admin network policy and how it relates with others, and like just making sure people don't shoot themselves in the foot. And so he highlighted that we like had user tooling for like a requirement in the KEP for admin network policy, and I guess we had good community interest in this tooling as well. So Suri and I presented at the last KubeCon, and we got like a big crowd applause, excited about, bringing this tooling. And so the downside to the last KubeCon was we didn't have like really an accessible tool. So this is where we're kind of thinking like, let's get a release out so that people can just download a CLI and start messing around with their policies. So that's like the goal of the project. Of course, Andrew might not be able to help much anymore. And so at this point, I think I am like the only person working on it. So I think one concern like others have had is like what do we do about a PR that I write? Like who should write looks good to me on that? So that's just like one process thing is like I guess it's kind of a one-man show at this point. So like how should we go about that? But at the same time, like I was just curious, like if anyone's interested in working on this, it would be awesome to get like another set of hands for people who are in the SIG. We do have two contributors who have helped before, but they're outside the Kubernetes organization. So I don't know if that's relevant. But yeah.
May I ask if those people still contribute, or it means that they're not active anymore?
One person I haven't seen in a while. And then I think the other is active.
So currently we have you and one extra active contributor, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
All right, Suri, you want to add something?
No, I was just trying to say if the active contributor is interested in continuing contributions, maybe they can join the Kubernetes SIGs membership. Like I think it takes 2 votes to add them as a member if they're interested. That could also ease some of the pain in case they're interested in continuing to contribute and do reviews.
Yeah, I could definitely ask if they're interested. They'll be raising, or they just raised their second PR today, so hopefully that's probably good enough.
But okay, do you have now the approval rights on that part though?
Approver rights. Oh, I do. I am an owner for the policy assistant directory.
Okay, so at least you can potentially LGTM others people's PRs.
Yeah, so I guess the only blocker is if I write a PR, there's kind of no checks and balance on like whether it looks good.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right.
And like,
Well, first,
yeah,
I don't know if anyone here. I would say probably have the time to contribute more because I mean I'm certainly interested, but I don't think I just have the time to do that.
Didn't the policy assistant kind of grow out of the Cyclonus project? Any of the folks who kind of worked on that, could we get in touch with any of those? Like, didn't Jay Vyas, wasn't he one of the guys behind that? Just wondered if they would like to see that go forward. It seems like it kind of grew out of that.
yeah, that's a good point. We could look at the contributor list for Cyclonus and reach out to people. Yeah, no, Matt Fenwick, he was like the brains behind Cyclonus. He just like has been perhaps away for other reasons recently. So that's kind of why I started this conversation. He just might not have the bandwidth to contribute. But these are good action items.
Yeah,
I'll
another
ask.
one maybe.
Mhm.
Sorry, I'm thinking out loud. Like we are having KubeCon coming, we won't have such a large time slot for dedicated to network policy API this time. But still, maybe if you could get some like nice looking, easy to start issues or something in this area, and then when we ask for more contributors, and then they can easily find something that's easy to start with, maybe that could also help.
Yeah.
I mean, generally, we are not really good with that, unfortunately, but then maybe in this specific area, you could try, to kind of prepare a little bit for that. So if anyone is interested, they take a look and they feel like they can figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and what's the process for adding like a good first issue label? Is there a command, or is that more an admin thing?
I think anyone should be able to label that, but I don't quite remember what labels we have. But yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be difficult.
Okay.
You just write and then reach out on Slack if something doesn't work. We'll figure out how to do that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Because we're not the largest SIG, so don't have too many people.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, well, at least that's some ideas. Okay, and then I guess getting to this first one with the release, I had one question, which is I thought policy assistant version should depend on the API version. So, or is it able to parse like any version of ANP?
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. So it is like we use the Go packaging for the API, so it is tied to a release.
Okay, well, I mean, that doesn't stop us from anything, but it just means that the release of it probably should be somewhat similar to the API version that it actually can work with.
Right.
I think pragmatically, just for like getting something out by KubeCon, we could do the first release as a 0.0.1 or something and just say it supports this version of the API if that would block anything. But otherwise, yeah, agree it should be versioned with the API it supports.
One just devil's advocate for that. If we have new features or like bug fixes on top of an API version, that might get a little confusing. Sorry, if the CLI has patches and the API remains consistent.
Yeah,
Yes,
sorry,
our API versioning.
I didn't mean like make it one-to-one, but I meant, you know, the tool should have some reference to the version of the API that it supports, but it probably needs a, you know, an extra version field for the tool versioning on top of the other thing. But I thought that
Yeah,
might be the kind of thing that we would
right.
it would take a while to figure out the right thing and get it all approved, and we could do with shipping something just so we can link to it and get more people using the tool.
That sounds good. Yeah, so I
So-
guess like the initial thought for the name, if we are going to do a separate name, I was just thinking to like 0.0.1 dash Pola, or like POLA. It's kind of the name of the binary. Weird thing of doing. That's kind of, I guess extra context. Andrew wanted us to change the name of the binary from Cyclonus to something else. And so I have a PR out right now that would change it to POLA. And that is one of the PRs that would need looks good to me before the release.
Why is it not policy assistant?
Yeah, it could be policy dash assistant.
Oh, is POLA the short? I didn't realize it. Never mind. I guess that's what it
Yeah.
stands for.
Yeah. So I don't have big preferences there. But I just thought like the abbreviation might be easier to type.
Yeah, I mean, we can discuss that in the PR maybe itself.
Yeah,
Don't have to decide right now.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe you
but
can add a link here to the PR that does that.
yeah, let me do that. It also specifies the Go package module for the policy assistant. So would be great to get feedback on that name.
Yeah, sure, we can talk about that in the pull request. So is what else is missing so that you can actually tag the first release? What kind of help do you need?
So yeah, the only three remaining things are this renaming PR, that contributor just raised a PR that has the final feature, and then cutting the release. And that's where I'm just not exactly sure what process you guys would recommend for cutting the release. Because I know it won't be exactly the same. One piece for the release is there's like a Go releaser YAML. So I guess the admin could run Go release on that. But yeah, perhaps I'm jumping ahead.
Okay, so do you want all these things done before KubeCon? So this week? Yeah.
Ideally,
Yeah,
the final
okay.
feature is like a very small change. So it's more just like changing the binary name and cutting the release. Ideally, I mean, it would be fun if we could get this into users' hands at KubeCon, but I understand it's like, you know, we are running out of time.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice, so we can try to do that. I mean, this pull request seems fairly straightforward, so maybe if, yeah, we just need to find all the right links and stuff. And then final feature, I guess that's something you're reviewing, right?
Yeah, that was
Okay,
just
so then you
raised.
can, yeah, you can, well, decide yourself, I guess, how quickly you can merge that one. And then
Mhm.
cutting the release is also where you mostly need help, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, let's try to figure that out. Shouldn't be too difficult. So let's maybe also talk in Slack because, well, I mean, we don't have to figure out everything right now, but just, yeah, everyone else, let's try to just help it and have this new release before KubeCon. It would be really nice to present that.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the help, everybody.
Yeah, sure. And also don't hesitate to maybe ping us more in Slack this week with all the pull requests and links because it may be a bit hard to track what is urgent, what's not. So
Yeah,
just
definitely.
yeah,
And
tag us and we'll try to approve it.
yeah, I'm definitely trying to front load everything early this week. So I'll just be proactive on Slack. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, that sounds good. Okay, let's try to do that. We'll see how it goes.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you. All right, we can move on. Oh, I have the most controversial thing again, which is tenancy, which, as you may know, can take up till the end of the meeting. So, okay, let me visit the next one first, and then we'll get back to it. I wanted to just quickly iterate over this issue, which I cannot make sense of somehow till now. This fail close discussion. We've had some comments and some nice suggestions. But I think one piece I cannot understand is by reading the original fail close definition from the CAP, it seems like what was understood by fail closed is kind of ignore the configuration where the implementation doesn't understand a single field from the peer. But I think what Sean suggested here was that if it's a deny rule, let's say deny node selector, that you do not understand as an implementation, you just deny all or something like that. Was that the case?
So the intent is that if you don't understand the policy, you want to guarantee that you implement something at least as secure as that policy. And since you don't understand it and can't get it exactly right, you want to err on the side of being too secure, not too insecure.
But that's something what we are deciding right now. Or do you think that's what was meant like here with this
Yes.
whole original failed close? Because it definitely doesn't say that.
So
it says like ignore. It doesn't say deny all when you don't know what you're trying to deny exactly.
The issue is that the text was sort of based more on how people did it for network policy, where there's the baseline deny all. So if you don't, any rule is an allow rule. And so if you don't understand it, you can just ignore it, and you know that you won't be allowing things you shouldn't allow.
Okay.
But with
Yeah, I
AMP,
mean, I
it's
see.
more complicated because
Yeah.
you have to deal with the fact that there may be both allow and deny rules that you don't understand.
Yeah, I see the security point of view. The only my concern is that if you're trying to deny something small, but instead you deny all, your cluster may be broken because deny all is a very strong security rule if you just wanted to deny one node or something.
Right. You know,
You're fine with that?
I mean, well, it's okay. So for one, this should almost never happen, right? Like as we discussed in there, it can only happen if the plugin is installing a CRD that has fields that it doesn't implement.
Yeah.
And you know, if you've installed a CRD that doesn't support a feature and then you try to use that feature, I mean, you've messed up.
Yeah.
The implementation shouldn't be using a version of the API that has fields they don't support, right? They should be using an older version.
So there's discussion in the PR. I pointed out, somebody might implement networks but not nodes, for instance, right? And so any version of the CRD that they install is going to have both of them. And so in that case,
I think the
Yeah.
way things have shaken out so far, we're all shipping the version that goes with our own implementation, and then yeah, you would have to be in a situation where you're doing a partial implementation or something, as Dan said. I guess in the future, like as this becomes more standard, you might find that changes where people are bundling CRDs and stuff separate from the implementation of those CRDs, but I don't know how it'll play out.
Yes,
Is
Surya?
this in somehow it's tying back to that standard versus experimental discussion we have, which we haven't reached consensus because we didn't write it down yet, which I planned to open an issue to capture. It's kind of tied to that, right? Because if it's the standard, or when by standard here, I'm meaning the stable bits of the API. If that's the CRD we ship, then expectation is for all implementations to ship that stable thing. But for experimental, I think that there's a valid concern that if people want to opt out of specific fields and not have them implemented. So I'm guessing that's where this confusion is coming, right? And of course, we haven't really defined if standard really means stable or mandatory, right? Which is what we should also define.
but you're basically saying it's not allowed for an implementation to implement half of a new release and then ship it to users, right?
Yeah. If we decide to go with that definition that a standard means
Well, no. I
stable
mean,
things, which
they're planning to implement the whole thing, but they only had time to get one of the two features done for this release. And so the question is, should they be allowed to ship, with one of the two features, but not both of them? And maybe we do.
it's it's
Right, but
incomplete.
also when you add new like experimental peer types, right? For example.
Yeah, in
also
experimental, we
have-
will have that problem, right? Yeah, it's true. But like, for example, we don't implement FQDN and OVNK yet, but I wouldn't pin it to a version that has that field yet. But it's hard to have those releases done in a way where for each field we have a release that we can pin to. Because I'm assuming in Sean's case, he gets nodes and networks, but he only wants networks and not nodes.
Yeah, we're kind of in that situation right at the moment. We implemented networks because it was easy, and then nodes just requires a little bit more work to do the plumbing, and it didn't make it in for our release. So we are in that situation at the moment, and we were implementing that as well. If you specify nodes, then if you specify nodes on a drop rule, we drop all if you've got that rule as the safety feature. But yeah, it's a crap behavior if you ever find yourself in that situation where you try to use a feature that your security provider doesn't support. But I don't know, feels like the right thing to do to me to fail closed in that way. And at least the observable behavior is everything breaks when I apply this policy. So you go and investigate it, and like you realize that there's a problem. Whereas the real danger with these products is if we fail open, then nobody notices because the traffic they expected to be allowed is allowed, but the traffic that should be dropped is not dropped.
Okay, but do we consider reporting some status error in that case? Or like we think no one will check status if things work?
Having a status sounds like a reasonable idea.
I mean, it's just, yeah, it's a bit aggressive. I see how it's more secure. I'm not sure if it will provide the best user experience if something upgrades for whatever reason to the combination where everything gets denied and then like all traffic will be dropped, which may mean including Kube API and all the other things that were not originally denied. So the cluster may not even be recoverable at some point because it will not be able to accept any requests. So that's why it sounds pretty dangerous to
I
default
guess
to
another
denial.
possibility, especially if we have the status reporting, would be to say, if there's any rule in the policy that you don't understand, you have to ignore the entire policy and add a status saying that you did that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know again if it's more secure or less secure. There are different options. Like if your policy had a deny all as the last rule, and then all the other rules were allowing something, then it's kind of more
Right.
secure to ignore or to ignore only the rule you don't understand.
I mean, I guess I was going more from the like obviously broken, you know,
Yeah.
they'll notice it quickly sort of thing.
Yeah, that's also one option. So you either ignore a rule or you ignore the whole policy and then you report an error, but you don't get back to default denying something. Does that make sense? Should we like continue this discussion in the pull request or something?
Yeah, sorry, I haven't kept it with the pull request comments this week. I've been working on the KubeCon slides. So I haven't been keeping up with that. But yeah, I think we could continue the discussion there.
All right. Well, yeah, I think we've had some extra comments. I'll put the concern about breaking the whole cluster to the brick there. All right. Okay, unless there are any other things that you didn't have a chance to put on the agenda, I wanted to get back to the tenancy discussion, see how quickly we can figure it out. So first, to answer this question, this part will not really work. I mean, it's still same, not same labels, but the problem is you cannot put it now inside like any random ingress or egress rule. And I will try to explain why. So for tenancy, now with the latest updates and stuff, there is basically three main parts of the tenancy. First is like the tenant definition, how you decide which namespaces are a part of a tenant or should be affected by the tenancy. Thanks to a nice suggestion that actually users like to do, well, that's the most popular request probably, to do tenancy per namespace, which can be easily done by using this label. That means that you want every namespace to be its own tenant, but you don't want all namespaces in the cluster to be a part of tenancy. Most likely you'll only want your special user namespaces. So that is why it probably makes sense to have a selector like this, which separately selects all the namespaces that should be affected and has a tenancy label as a separate thing. And we have discussed multiple options about that, but basically the main difference is this version will have to create like a non-tenant, meaning that if the label is not actually present on some of the selected namespaces, I don't know if that's a very big problem or not. But the request to have to be able to use this label as a tenancy label is definitely there. Any strong opinions on that?
I don't think I quite got the problem with using. I'm not sure why you needed to introduce a non-tenant. Can you just go over that
Right.
again?
So yeah. So let's say we have a separate tenant selector, right? That selects some namespaces with some labels that do not necessarily intersect with the tenancy labels. So you have a set of namespaces, and then you say split these namespaces into tenants based on this label. Unless you have this kind of selector which ensures that this label exists.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
There is a case where this label just is none. So which means you will have a tenant with none label, which was kind of considered strange, but also is potentially, well, I mean, the workaround for that is to recommend using this label, this selector, if that's what your intention is. But also that's the only way to actually allow using this nice convenient label that already exists. Okay, unless there are any more feedback on that, I'll move on to the next part of that. That's like a quick review of current NPAP, maybe to bring you up to speed. Then there is basically peers and actions that you may need. And that's a part of why it doesn't make much sense to insert tenancy as a part of existing ingress and egress rules. You do not really need an egress and ingress to be separate for tenants. Because basically, if you say deny egress for same tenant, it also means that ingress will be denied because tenant is like the same entity. So every tenant will already deny something for egress. That means that ingress will not be possible. I don't know if it's hard or easy to follow that thought. I think I have it written a bit better in the NPAP itself, but the outcome is that tenancy doesn't need to be split into ingress and egress because it's just one action. You either allow same tenant or you do not. I hope that makes sense. And then another idea to that, and feel free to raise a hand if you need more clarification on something, was another discussion we had is it probably makes more sense for admins to say pass same tenant as opposed to strictly allow same tenant. So that means that network policies on a lower level still can change something for the same tenant. And then the other like reasonable option is deny not same tenant, because denying same tenant, we didn't have a single use case to do that. Doesn't make much sense. So basically, the next question is, do we really need to allow same tenant? And then Sean had one example in his list of like educational platform where you actually want to make sure someone does not deny something in a namespace by accident. Like imagine you have students that are, I don't know, playing with their own namespaces. And that may be one case where instead of actually letting them do what they want with pass, you may want to strictly allow same tenant so that, yeah, they do not break something. But again, I don't know if there is, any feedback on that.
I felt like it was pretty tenuous, but I think the thing I was trying to get across is I just genuinely feel like admins want to be able to override anything. Like they don't want to be limited to like, oh, I have to pass and then I have to think about what the namespace guy's gonna do. Like I just want to be able to say allow and move on, and don't, like I want to disable namespace policy in my cluster and do my own thing. There's going to be users who want to do that. But that's my personal slant on it, I think.
Yeah, I think Dan, you had some opinion on that before. Do you want to add something?
So, the other thing that the admin could do in this case is just not give people permission to create network policies. I mean, there's certainly an argument for it's more consistent if we allow them the same actions on tenants as they have on other rules. So I think I guess as long as it's very clearly documented what allow means, I almost feel like we should rename allow.
I always say something else instead of pass, actually. Skip, I think, or something. Okay, well, I mean, that's actually, that makes sense. It's not also the biggest problem. I mean, in this design, if that's like these are the only actions we think are required, we can always add this one potentially if needed, like a new action type, or we can just create it from the beginning. But I think it's fairly easy to understand what it does.
Well, either way, we're not preventing us from adding it later if someone comes along with a use case. I don't think it wasn't like the biggest thing. Biggest point I had, I don't think.
Yeah, I just figured we should also talk about that while we're at this point. So basically, these things that we've discussed is everything you need to define a tenant. It's a fairly simple thing, and I hope you can see how it doesn't fit exactly into this ingress versus egress rules in the regular admin network policy. So another thing,
So
I was going to say, admin network policy doesn't need separate ingress and egress rules for anything, because you needed a network policy because you can only create rules that apply to your own pods. But in theory, the admin can create rules that apply to any pods. And so they don't need to be able to separately say allow ingress or allow egress. They can just say allow this pod to talk to this other pod.
Right. Yeah, I don't think it may be a bit difficult for people to switch to this type of thinking, but in general, you could do that. Yeah.
So in that sense, I mean, I guess I want to see what the whole API looks like, but I don't think that's a strong argument for having tenant rules either only be separate from ingress and egress. Like if separating them from ingress and egress makes the API more confusing, then we might just want to say, yep, you can have you can specify your tenant rules on either ingress or egress, just don't mess it up.
Well,
I think that's kind of the same as what I was going to say.
yeah, that's not the only thing. There is also, so all ingress and egress rules also have some more things in common, which is all of them allow ports, right, or something. And I think we decided tenants do not ever need port selectors. I mean, otherwise it would be really convenient to just insert tenancy at a given priority as one of the rules if ingress and egress was not there. I mean, I don't know how easy it is to discuss now. Like, do we consider then changing admin network policy to remove ingress and egress rules?
It's probably too, I mean, I want to, but it's probably too late.
Okay. Yeah.
But I was just saying more from the perspective of it already, the ingress egress split already doesn't make sense. So the fact that it doesn't make sense for tenants doesn't necessarily mean that we should get rid of it for tenants.
But
we can just allow it to not make sense in the same way.
In AMP, we've got CIDRs and FQDNs at this point, and they only really make sense for egress, I think.
Well, ingress may work at some point, yeah, but that's actually one of the reasons.
Yeah. But that certainly FQDNs kind of don't really make sense for ingress.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That makes total sense.
Although users absolutely want them to make sense for ingress. And the number of times I've had that conversation.
Right. If we got rid of ingress and egress, then the admin network policy would have source and destination. And there would be some things that we might only allow as source and other things that we only allowed for destination. In particular, the ports would always be on the destination, which would make so much more sense than the way it is now.
Yep. Not crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, source and destination are just kind of also ingress and egress. I mean, there are still two sides of that. And then for tenancy, it still doesn't make sense. Tenancy doesn't have two sides. It's like applying to it to yourself. If that makes sense. So that doesn't quite solve that.
Well, I mean, the source would be pods in the tenant and the destination would be pods in the same tenant or pods in a different tenant, right?
In that sense, yeah. I mean, as long as you only allow it once. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting format.
Anyway, unless other people have an appetite for completely breaking the API in V1X2, we don't actually need to discuss how that would work.
Right, but it's still a nice discussion. Okay, let's try to move on. I promised it's gonna be long. Okay, so now the most tricky part is the priority. We already have a set of priorities and we say where every rule in every admin network policy stands in this like priority set. We have already discussed making like tenancy its own CRD or potentially even two CRDs to make it similar to admin and baseline admin network policy, which did not fly quite well. I don't think people really like, and I mean, it's a lot of overhead and like extra work to just have extra CRDs. So for now, I will just be trying to propose some options of how we can put them into existing CRDs. And then if you think it still makes sense to get back to this separate CRD discussion, we can do that. So anyway, one common disadvantage of like having tenancy as a part of admin network policy is that it gives more flexibility than intended, meaning that we originally, I think, only have use cases for like single tenancy definition in the whole cluster. I actually cannot promise that like maybe 2 different tenancy definitions may make sense. But anyway, with that thing, you can, if you just make it a part of admin network policy, you potentially can create as many tenancies as you want. So that's like one common disadvantage of that. But the opposite thing of that is that at least they will have a well-defined priority, so you can still, well, understand how it should work. Now, where can we put basically these 2 previous slides is all the spec for the tenancy you need. Where can we put that? In regular ANP, we could already have this namespace selector as a subject. And then if you're using tenancy in any way, then only namespace selector would be allowed. Pod selector will not be allowed in the subject in that case. And then what you could do is like this extra field that kind of turns the tenancy on. So it means as long as you see, as soon as you see this field, it means it's like tenancy CRD mode, and ingress and egress rules are not allowed in it, which would mean that basically this tenancy eats the whole priority of admin network policy. Another problem with that, besides just, well, being slightly ugly, that one field switches other fields on and off, is that it conflicts with the singleton BNP. So if you do the same thing with BNP and there is only one object, you either can have a BNP with regular peers or tenancy BNP. Now, another option, which is also similar, is you can add tenancy together with existing ingress and egress peers. But what that means is you will have to add one extra priority for the tenancy and say where exactly it lies, like between ingress and egress peers. Is it like the highest priority for this admin network policy? Is it the lowest priority? So it's like a bit of an implicit priority option. And one problem with that is that there are existing implementations that, knowing that we allow a given amount of rules for each admin network policy that has a given amount of peers, that already means that basically if you try to flatten all admin network policies into one large like priority scale, then you could reserve 10,000 priorities for every ANP and then be sure that you will be fine and all priorities will be correct. So now when we basically insert one extra priority, for example, saying tenancy is the highest priority inside one admin network policy, you will need to like reserve 10,001 priority for each admin network policy, which may not be really nice for some implementations. So that's kind of a problem. And it also, well, this is one is shared for everything, which it gives more flexibility than intended. I hope you're still following me with the differences between these, because there is the third one, which is same as the first one, but it says, oh, let's add priority to baseline admin network policy and we will not have that problem. So your tenancy will still eat the whole priority within one object, but then we'll also say, okay, baseline admin network policy is not singleton anymore. You can have as many as you want, which also may have its use cases potentially in the future. I don't know, but this is one of them. Okay, this is basically all my current options. Please let me know what you think about that. Anyone?
Is this all in the current version of the PR?
I think this and much more. So this is actually a focused version, I would say.
I feel like the more I've thought about it, the more I feel like putting it in the ingress and egress rules, even though like as you say, it's not really like it doesn't necessarily make as much sense as one of these proposals. But I feel like you say, the toggling between 2 completely different flavors of policy in the same object feels a little bit nasty. I don't know. That was my gut feel anyway. I do think that we need to take account of the priority, and certainly from a UI point of view, for at least for Calico, it's a bit awkward to have yet another type of the tenancy policy floating around that needs to be displayed in UIs and shown in a different way. I guess we could just kind of ignore it and implement the policy, but not display it in our UI in a similar way. But it sort of felt like maybe it wasn't pulling its weight to be worth having a separate resource, and then adding priority into it and having the two versions, the baseline and the admin network policy versions of tenancy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe I should add this option, putting it into ingress and egress rules with also like a list of cons, because there are some, I mean, we just need to decide which disadvantages we like more, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could just, if you're writing your policy as an admin, you don't necessarily need to do both the ingress and the egress rules. You could just do the ingress rules if that's how you normally do your policy, or you could do both. I don't know. Just thinking through what it would be like to write one of these. I think in a lot of cases, whatever we say in the docs, like here's how you do tenancy, it'll be a copy and paste for a lot of folks, because they're just going to want the simple version where they just drop the policy in, tweak the label that they're using, and then they'd be happy and on their way, I would expect. There's probably some people who will cook up ridiculous things with it. But yeah, I don't know. In terms of different, multiple tenants, multiple types of multiple different labels for different groups of tenants, I don't know if people want to do that. I could imagine cooking up something really elaborate if you're in a really big company and you've got different groups within engineering, and you want the engineering namespaces to all be able to be isolated by default, but talk to each other with delegation to the network policy, but you want engineering and marketing to be totally separate and never talk to each other unless it's admin approved, or I don't know. There's probably elaborate things where you have tenants and subtenants that will come out of the woodwork once it was out there. But then if you just separate the subtenants in a way that allows delegation, maybe that's good enough for a lot of folks anyway.
Yep, makes sense. I guess still for me, like putting it into ingress, let's say, and then when it actually means that egress will also have the same action, that's like the part that I don't like the most.
Well,
Just
it doesn't mean that
user
it has the same action though, right? Like if you say, well, I mean,
Yeah,
if pod A doesn't accept ingress from pod B, that's the same as. I mean, Sean's right. You logically, you only need to specify it on either ingress or egress, as long as every pod has the same rule saying like it only accepts ingress from pods in the same namespace. That automatically implies that it doesn't accept egress from pods in other namespaces, right?
but it also implies that egress to the same namespace should be allowed for this rule to even make sense. That's the part that I don't like. There is no point in separating ingress and egress, because if you say allow ingress from same namespace, but you deny egress to same namespace, actually everything is denied, but you have an allow ingress rule, which makes things confusing.
But you can do that with explicit ingress and egress rules as well, right? Like you can have forcibly allow all ingress, but that doesn't stop somebody else at a lower priority from denying egress. And
I think
Right,
that's kind of where I am, is like you can already do it, and yes, it's not perfect, and maybe if we defined the policy in the way Dan described, then it would have felt natural to do what you're proposing, Nadia. But given we have defined the policy with ingress and egress, it's just a problem that you already have, and maybe it's too awkward to have another concept. That's kind of where I was.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, the only difference is that for pod selectors, there is actually a valid configuration when ingress and egress rules may have different actions and then select different pods. For tenancy, that's just not the case. Can you, like, yeah, say, I mean, I'm worried about some strange cases where you like deny all somewhere by default for egress, let's say, and then you only allow ingress for the tenant in a rule, and then you'd like the egress will get denied by something else because your tenancy didn't mention the egress rule. I mean, so yeah, probably we can say just fix it so that it actually works, or like always explicitly specify ingress and egress rules for the same tenant or something. But also, so okay, another problem with that is this part where I was saying when you add tenancy somewhere, it's only allowed to have the namespaces selector, because pod selector here doesn't make sense. Do you think we then can say like that all the, if there is at least one like tenancy rule in the admin network policy, then it's like the same rule applies, that subject can only have namespaces in it?
That kind of thing does feel a little bit awkward when you have all cross field dependencies like that.
Yeah. That's kind of where we started, I think.
I'm trying to picture what the ingress rule would look like. If it was embedded in an ingress rule, say, or an egress rule. Well,
Oh yeah, that's pretty tricky also, because now every rule has like its action, and actions may be different for tenants. Again, if we only want to allow reasonable configurations and not like deny same tenant. And then every ingress rule now has ports, which also probably should not apply to tenancy. So that's why it's pretty tricky to just put it in here. We'll also either have to like not allow some of the fields of ingress rule if this ingress rule is of type tenancy or something like that.
I think my approach would just be to allow people to write a stupid rule to avoid too many validation rules and all that sort of stuff. But if someone comes on my Slack and asks, why is this traffic denied? And they've got a policy that says deny same tenant. Well, I would shrug and say, read your policy. Yeah,
Well, you need
I mean,
to get all the labels first.
I mean, it's really nice if it's really nice if you can define your policy so that it's very hard to misuse. I just worry that the fiddliness of doing that makes it harder to use, and that's a balance to be struck. I tend to come down on the side of making things orthogonal where possible, so you can combine things, and then if you combine them in a silly way, well, you applied your policy and it didn't allow traffic that you wanted to be allowed, but the policy says deny that traffic. So you kind of iterate and come back to the policy. But yeah, it's nice if you can define things so that they're it's hard to misuse, of course.
Yeah, I mean, admin network policy is confusing enough, especially with tenancy. I feel like, yeah, people may be very confused by it.
I think one glimmer of hope that I have is that several times I've been asked by users for same and not same labels in the policy. So users already have like an idea of like, oh, if you gave me same and not same labels, I could solve my own problem. And maybe they're right, but it does, you know, there's potential foot guns as well. But like maybe that's just the way to go. I think it's the right, certainly for Calico, like that's the natural way to kind of implement it. I think the simplification of only implementing it for namespaces is worthwhile for us, but I think we'd end up implementing same and not same labels internally, just because that's how it would work in our data model internally. And that's probably how we would implement tenants. We'd kind of map them into a policy at the right level that had same and not same label.
You also only apply it for namespaces, right? On namespace labels.
Yeah.
So
So
do you have this limitation then?
So I think we would take that simplification of only using namespace labels. So I think that makes things easier for us as well. And it's good enough for tenancy, as you say. So that makes sense not to do the pod labels, because pod labels are very complicated once you consider kind of namespace and pod labels interacting and stuff. They're complicated for us anyway.
Okay, so I think one extra thing I can do is try to show how it could look like if we try to insert tenancy into like ingress and egress rules. I will write the long list of all the misconfigurations you can end up with by doing that, and then we can take a look at that maybe and see how bad it is. Any other options or opinions across these three plus this fourth option of trying to put it inside ingress?
We're at a time anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's like a to-do items for me, maybe not to really discuss, but if some more ideas that I should consider. Okay, I'll do that then. We're out of time. So thank you all for joining. That was an interesting discussion. I'll try to get back with more options later.
Thanks, Nadia.